remember as a child being in my mother's car and my dad's car, absorbing different types of music. My mother was all about classic R&B, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Shaka Khan, Patti LaBelle. My father raised me on the positive messages of Bob Marley, the Lover's Rock of Sanchez, Glenn Washington, Beres Hammond. My grandfather was a lover of jazz music, and through my Trinidadian heritage, I discovered soca and calypso. I never thought of the importance of this combination as a poet until now, this new manuscript I've been working on. I call it Previously Unreleased Screams. It's an investigation into the ways black music interprets race, color, and struggle. Now, the backdrop for this collection is jazz music and calypso music from the 1950s to the 1970s. This period contains some of the most politically charged records in popular music. It was also during this time that black music was being listened to around the world, allowing for an extended conversation to be had across physical borders. For example, in 1957, Lord Kitchener, a calypsonian from Trinidad and Tobago, created a tune called Birth of Ghana, which celebrated Ghana's independence from Great Britain. This song became so popular it sold over 300,000 copies in Ghana. Between North America, Africa, and the Caribbean, black music has always been an exchange of ideas, cultures, frustrations, fears. The poems I'm going to read today are going to talk about how black music, jazz music in particular, created political pan-African statements that cross physical borders, how calypso music used racial language to cross physical borders, and how Europe, ironically enough, comes to complicate this idea of belonging in the African diaspora. Now, in 1959, Max Roach, he was a jazz drummer from North Carolina. He collaborated with a lyricist named Oscar Brown, and they collaborated with two goals in mind. The first goal was to create an album that would translate the African American experience from slavery, from emancipation, to the present day of 1959. The second goal was to perform this album in 1963, that year being important as it was the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. This was the year in which the NAACP and many other organizations felt that blacks and whites would be fully equal in America. But due to the growing urgency of something called the Civil Rights Movement, Max Roach felt it was necessary to release the album sooner, so he released it in 1960. The poem I'm going to read is going to talk about that album and my response to that. And much like the album was this avant-garde experimental approach to a jazz album, I wanted to write a poem that kind of mirrored the emotion and structure of an experiment. As you can see here, this is how the poem looks. Max Roach quits on the centennial and other findings, 1960. Abstract. The emancipation freed no one. Tune the band. Materials. Roach in the membrane crawling, all tension lifts. Rift coming full circle, thoughts inside the insider metered. Olatunji on side 2, full-headed Nigerian sky, conga gilded gold. One-man shout band, priester trombone, spit valve deposit. Booker Lincoln, he doesn't know he's going to die next year. Mantilla and Duval shadow the spine, give a body some drum and watch it vibrate. Abby Lincoln guards the sorcery. Abby Lincoln is riot and griot and grit and all real black woman and low moan and fever and climax. Shank brings the bump and boil. Benton and Hawkins blow something shocked and awkward. Each take their breath on the question, whizzing through the rhythm section like javelins cutting across a cornfield. Experimental. The idea was to perform the album at the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation, the NAACP Wet Dream, a Negro Day, as if every Southern state trooper would adopt an incurable kindness, as if the black man's mourning no longer bloomed with penalty. All musicians were handpicked from all across the world, studio cool to a blue, regions of hope and dispute. Typically, the sample is considered too controversial to be continued, but Max made up his mind. Nothing else he recorded would be without the feeling of metal and rebellion, acidic growl and conversation. How often do you feel what you don't know how to feel. Results. Civil War soundtrack 3 years ahead of schedule. Black people have nothing but their urgency. Africa given 2 songs, the story that was peeled, the inedible fruit. Look to your left, your prison mate is your cousin, for an amendment tells me so. Look to your right, your distant relatives are suffering from a skin disease called apartheid. Spending time wishing a nigga would. It's not about a salary, it's all about geography. Spending time quiet when a white man does, it's not about a salary, it's all about geography. Spending time questioning who I am is not about a salary, it's all about geography. Revelations. The first track, Drive a Man. Never quitting time, the overseer at his back, his gaze dethroning the sun. This is struggle, Brown and Abby's baritone. To turn belief into fight, you need provocation and the safety of tomorrow. The second track, Freedom Day, plays like a war report. They dropped the shackles, picked up shotguns. In the battles, they stood on the front lines, which is to say, they couldn't escape an auction even if they tried. Prayer, protest, peace is the best song on the album, but I am tired of that fruitless sequence. Abby's yells reach the top and fall. Yes, she is holding this all together, but this is what a whipping sings like. All Africa is more impossible by the day, but we don't know that yet. It is only a fist trying to hurt the sky. Tears for Johannesburg. How? Ask the black person to your left to point to Johannesburg on a map. See, locate, cure, future work. See most recently To Pimp a Butterfly, Strange Fruit, Black Messiah. It takes a nation of millions to hold us back. We shall overcome. Stoned Love. There's a riot going on. What's going on? Conclusion. Music happens when change doesn't. That's the first one. Oh. Yeah, I told him I'm gonna need water because that first poem was a doozy. So, in that poem, Max Roach, even in a story that was supposed to translate the African-American experience, he felt it was necessary to include 2 songs about Africa, All Africa and Tears for Johannesburg. This being important as it was the African-American narrative and the African narrative converging in one spot, adding to this never-ending conversation with music within the African diaspora. And when we talk about conversation, we can't have this without communication, without language. And I mentioned Lord Kitchener before, and he understood this point greatly. He always used language in an interesting way in his Calypso songs. In 1957, he created a song called Don't Come Back Again. And this song is important as it is one of the first popular calypsos to prominently use the word nigger in it. And it's very telling how, this word nigger with its African-American roots had spread to the Caribbean. So this is in response to that. Don't come back again. No nigger man ever again in Kitsch House. No one to Mako around town about roaches, crude, primate, feisty as the hiss of a tea kettle. Kitsch went out of his way to be generous, made him rice and hen, and only an asymmetrical man with bad talk who feeds him. Niggas gnaw until their hands are unrecognizable, until a whole house is gone. But Kitsch gonna wait for him, patient as poison in a bowl of Callaloo to open his back. See, Kitsch keeps it simple, secretive as the back of a fridge, doesn't mind a visitor or 2 for drinks, vibes, and in the case of a nigger man, inevitable thefts. He stops by for ginger tea and the bitterness walks him home. You see, the Port of Spain nigger man miscalculates the mystics. He never would think that Kitsch could make a tune using the music of someone else's walk. But pace is all around him. Lyrics leap from the cabinets as they open. There is nowhere to move while knee-deep in this cinema of insult. But something has to catch between the tension and hum within the bars. You see, Everywhere you go, you leave a song. And this one has no political correction. It might even win the Calypso Road March this year. There's no checks for racial slurs at the judging points. The only thing that matters is replay value. And nigger has replay value, meaning it survives. And so again, as you can see here, the word transfers from America to the Caribbean, takes on some new context, some styling, some alterations, which is ultimately very important when we talk about the African diaspora and how that pertains to like borders. Like music is just being like this exchange of ideas. And when we're talking about a conversation and we're talking about the African diaspora, we are ultimately talking about convergence. We're talking about things coming from different places and meeting at one point. And ironically enough, Europe is one of these places where black artists did go and visit and enjoyed, to some degree, some success. When you look at artists such as Josephine Baker, Albert Eiler, Lord Kitchener himself, even James Baldwin, all, enjoyed this time in Europe. And then there was a whole, African-American expatriates movement and a West Indian expatriates movement that came to Europe, and that it contains a very complex history. And it kind of challenges this idea of Europe being this source of belonging for the black artists. And I wanted to, examine that in this next poem. There's no place like home. It starts with the swift black pearl, Josephine Baker, her Charleston dazzling France. But she came back to the States to dance again as if she could stuff the standing ovations from overseas in her purse and sprinkle it all over a New York City theater. After her comeback performances, Time magazine called her a Negro wench. Every American stage felt like tree bark under her feet. Wrestling that old Western conundrum, anything to be seen had already been seen, and if it hadn't been seen, it was unworthy. In a time when black and women and power was looked at as some unholy trinity, she had to go back to Europe. Hate can make a home for you, can make your bed sheets, and sometimes even has the shower water ready before you walk in the door. And that's what brings Albert Eiler here. You see, back in the States, he was supposed to be the next Charlie Parker, till he started doing all that free jazz stuff, his mouth wild like Master's Nightmare. They said he was playing so bad that sometimes it sounded like his saxophone was playing him. But the Swedish and the Danish got down with him. They never knew the groove, and they didn't even care. There's something spiritual about being in a room where nothing is understood. His horn twisted like it sat in a black church and learned how to speak in tongues. But Kitsch had it best. Banking off Belafonte, his first words when he got here, London is the place for me. Believe me, he's speaking broad-mindedly, an ambassador. They called that generation the Windrush, but no breeze was strong enough to blow him back home for 18 years. Here, on this European soil, here, they could shout sorrows to the palest face they could find. The compassion, the confusion didn't have anything sharp underneath it. David Rudder once said, the Calypsonian hides a blade underneath their smile. Did they forget about the audience? Did they mistake subtlety for safety? And why not Africa, hashtagged over their heads like a halo if they had hashtags back then? A need for warmth, but no time to rebuild what was already warm. The source unfinished and undesirable. But you see, why not Africa? That question burning in the skull, and the answer, away from the answer, is how the earth always belonged to them, how blackness bloomed under any condition. The albums and paintings, spin moves and splits, false starts and falsettos, inventions and indefinites, their wildest botany. One of the most important ways that black people interrogate their own belonging is through the context in their songs. The jazz being It's an original African-American form, and Calypso, often cited as Trinidad's walking newspaper, they both in particular have done the complex work of unpacking the idea of what it indeed to belong in the African diaspora, or what it indeed means to be of Africa. And this is a continuous movement that has not stopped with the music of yesteryear. When hip-hop artist Kendrick Lamar calls himself King Kunta, or reggae artist Busy Signal covers an R&B song, we know beyond these borders we are influencing each other. I see black music as the way to say it is okay with multiplicity. It is how we are able to hold hands while being thousands of miles away from each other. Thank you.